This year, as you have heard repeatedly and excitedly, we celebrate AFT's 100th anniversary. This morning, we get to spend some time paying tribute to the women and men who have made AFT great. Before we start, it is an absolute pleasure for me to call on stage someone who happens to be very special to Loretta. We have great mentors among us all, and the AFT has a proud history of inspiring younger members to become strong union activists. Sandra Davis, would you please join us and share your very sweet story?
Good morning. My name is Sandra Davis, and I am chair of the Baltimore Teachers Union PSRP chapter, local number 340. Today, I have been given the privilege of introducing someone who needs no introduction, Dr. Loretta Johnson. The theme, Generation to Generation, honoring our past, inspiring our future, is a perfect match for Dr. Loretta Johnson. The name Loretta Johnson is a name I've heard in my home several times as a little girl growing up in Baltimore. Like Dr. Johnson, my mother, a retired PSRP, was one of the first paraprofessionals hired by Baltimore City public school system. When they were hired, paraprofessionals did not have defined working conditions, collective bargaining, or a contract. It was with persuasion and support from other paraprofessionals that Dr. Johnson took the lead and negotiated the first contract for the paraprofessionals in Baltimore. I am proud to say that my mother was a Baltimore Teachers Union building representative. And I remember hearing her talk about Loretta Johnson. However, I had no idea who she was talking about. And back then, you didn't ask any questions. I would hear her say, Loretta said we need to do this, or we need to do that, or we shouldn't do this, or we shouldn't do that. They listened, and the next generation was listening too. When I began working for the Baltimore City Public Schools, the first thing my mother handed me was a card and said, fill this out and sign it. And being the obedient daughter that I am, I didn't ask any questions. I filled it out, I signed it. It was a union card. Early in my career, I met several union leaders, and they would tell me about Loretta Johnson. There's that name again. She's our leader. She fights for our rights, and the list went on. A few years later, the building representative at my work site suggested that I attend the Baltimore Teachers Union Paraprofessional Conference, and I did. And I heard a phenomenal woman speaking. It was Loretta Johnson, the person whose name was constant in my home. For the first time, I could actually put a name to a face. Listening to her speak inspired me to become involved in the union and the political process. It is because of her guidance and support over the years, I have become one of the leaders of the Baltimore Teachers Union. And I want to thank her for all of the opportunities she has given me. I don't think Dr. Johnson realizes the impact and influence she was having on the next generation as we listened to our parents discuss their working conditions and the steps that were necessary to improve them. And I didn't know at the time, but I was being introduced to union activism. Over the years, Dr. Loretta Johnson has traveled around the world fighting for the rights of all. She has met with school board members, mayors, governors, senators, presidents, and world leaders. Yet she has never forgotten where she came from. There's a quote that Dr. Johnson is famous for saying, If you see me fighting with a bear, you better get the bear some help. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce Dr. Loretta Johnson, a paraprofessional from Baltimore.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sandra, for those kind words. Wow, I very seldom get speechless. I've always got something to say. But Sandra has just made me speechless. It is so nice to hear and not wait till you die, everybody say something good. So, it is my honor today, though, to introduce the AFT's living legends. And I want to start by recognizing the Porter family. Robert G. Porter was AFT's Secretary-Treasurer for 28 years, from 1963 to 1991. And over the 28 years, Bob helped steer our union from 82,000 members to 820,000. As you can see, our legends grew our union as the people who follow us. And today, we honor his legacy with the Robert G. Porter Scholarship, helping AFT families achieve their dream of a higher education. Give a round of applause to Robert Porter's legacy. Next, I would like to introduce my brother and my dear friend, Nat LaCour. AFT Secretary Emeritus. And from his time as the president of the United Teachers of New Orleans to his work as a founding member of the National Board of Professional Teachers Standards, and the many boards he sits on today, Nat still is very active. Nat leadership has been a model for all around him. I'd also like to bring on, and we are honored to be joined by Richard Kallenberg, one of the foremost academic in education and labor, and a fierce advocate for public education. My sister, Fran Lawrence, longtime friend and president of the Toledo Federation of Teachers, and AFT's former executive vice president. Our sister, Jenny Shanker, is a fierce advocate for unionists, and especially for the rights of the fellow adjunct faculty. Her father, Al, was my mentor. And I couldn't be more proud to see Jenny so perfectly filling his shoes as a leader of the United Academics of Philadelphia, where she fights for herself and her contingency faculty colleagues in Philadelphia today. Jenny. My brother and friend, Ed McElroy. What you say? President Emeritus of AFT. And during his time as AFT Vice President, Secretary-Treasurer, and then President of our union, added more than 500,000 members, championed efforts to better support and strengthened our local structure. Ed broadened our union presence among labor and played a crucial part in expanding our political work. Last but by no means least, I want to introduce Beatrice Lumpkin. Now, I've been an AFT member for 50 years, and that's a long time, but Beatrice has been an AFT member for 83 years. And at 98, she's still fighting hard to make sure we level the playing field for working people and kids across America. Wow. So without further ado, Nat LaCour will start. We're going to have a screening first, and Nat will be speaking to you.
Thank you. I'm not sure you said it. Am I to talk or do you have streaming? Oh, okay. Well, I'm Nat LaCour. I, for a number of years, was president of the United Teachers of New Orleans and spent my last 10 years as the executive vice president of AFT, ending as secretary treasurer of AFT, retiring approximately 8 years ago. I am very happy to be able to make a few comments about organizing in the Deep South. I began my teaching career in the school year 1960-61 as a high school biology teacher. But the 1960-61 school year was also the first year in which the United States courts ordered the desegregation of students in the New Orleans public schools. And that desegregation started with simply 2 elementary classrooms, one in 2 schools, to integrate the first grade, with the intent that integration would progress at the level of 1 grade per year until it reached the 12th grade. The problem with that in 1960 was that there was strong resistance throughout the South to school integration, and that occurred also in New Orleans. That our governor had directed and forced the State Board of Education to suspend the New Orleans School Board as part of an effort to prevent the desegregation of schools. Well, and a number of other teachers that were seeking to begin our career as teachers, we could not be interviewed. And so that September, I could not be employed and had to wait until January when the courts finally gave the operation of our schools back to the local school board. But for those people who did work, those teachers, in the New Orleans public schools in the 1960-61 school year, from September to January, because the school local board had been taken out of office, those teachers did not receive a single paycheck. So it was over 4 months that they taught without pay. That November, the 2 teacher organizations, state organizations, held their conventions The association met in Baton Rouge, and so did the AFT state. The AFT's state organization that November did adopt a resolution denouncing the state for what it had done. The association that year went through its 3-day convention, never mentioning what had occurred in the state and the fact that teachers had not been paid in the New Orleans public schools, because it was only the city of New Orleans where the desegregation was scheduled to take place. I walked into the classroom my first day, which was after the Christmas break, January 3rd, 1961. And the first thing I did when I entered the building, I asked them to point out the union rep. And when I found the union AFT rep, I asked for a membership card. And I joined the union on my first day as a teacher. Well, I taught for a number of years, and what I found out was that teaching in a big city school had a lot of problems. There was low salaries. By the way, I remember the salary my first year. As a beginning teacher, fully certified, pay was $360 a month, or $3,600 a year. After I paid my federal and state taxes and Social Security, my net pay was $270 a month. And we were paid once per month. Now, salaries were low throughout the South, in fact, throughout the country in 1960. Benefits were almost non-existent in the South. We had a group hospitalization program, but the teachers and the school employees had to pay 100% of the premiums. The district contributed nothing. And it goes without saying that working conditions were not that great. We had very large classes, a lack of textbooks and other teaching resources. So that there was a lot of complaints in the teacher lounges and places. Now the unions, up until that point, in fact, practically throughout the country, the unions did not engage in collective bargaining. So their role was to be involved in politics, and they did a great role. They adopted salary schedules. Most of the tenure laws were adopted during that period of time before bargaining, and a few places even adopted bargaining laws. In fact, it wasn't until the 1960-61 school year when the New York teachers first engaged in collective bargaining. And so we were looking at what was going on in New York. And by 1966, my local union decided that it was going to petition the school district for collective bargaining rights. We submitted to that board petition signed by the teaching staff, and the board voted 4-1, no bargaining. Our teachers walked out of the classroom the next morning, and we conducted the first teacher strike in the South. That strike lasted 3 days, but we were unsuccessful in gaining bargaining rights. But we continued to organize as we went back to work. And in 1969, we conducted the second strike. This strike lasted 9 days. The first strike, we had 5,000 teachers in the district, 500 struck, I was one of them, and 4,500 crossed the picket lines. In the second strike, 1,000 of us struck, and 4,000 crossed the picket lines. Therefore, no bargaining. Coming out of the 1969 strike, I ran for an officer position in my union and was elected vice president. 2 years later, I ran and was elected president. During that time, we continued to push for collective bargaining. In 1970, we got the school board to agree to pay 25% of hospitalization premiums. This was before collective bargaining. And the next school year, we managed to put together a coalition of teacher organizations, both NEA and AFT, throughout the state, and we got the state legislature to provide an across-the-board raise for all teaching personnel. Those two events, board paying part of the premium for hospitalization and a salary increase through a coalition, allowed us to say to teachers, in unity there's strength, in union solidarity there is strength. And so, coming out of those two efforts, we had met with in fact, New Orleans was the site of the 1969 Teachers Convention. It was the AFT Convention, which is meeting here, met in New Orleans in 1969. And during that convention, we pulled Albert Shanker on the side, me and two other leaders, and we said to Mr. Shanker, if the AFT can provide some type of a financial assistance such that a couple of our union leaders can leave the classroom and organize full-time, we believe that we can gain collective bargaining in this district. And your dad went back to Dave Selden, who was then president of the AFT, and together they agreed to take two of us out of the classroom. And for the next several years, we managed to go into the school buildings in the mornings and in the afternoons with donuts and coffee, telling teachers about the benefits of collective bargaining, what was going on in New York and then other places. So a few years later, in fact, 1972, I was assigned by the AFT to go to New York City and work in an organizing campaign to help organize the professors at City University of New York. Only 2 weeks. I spent those 2 weeks traveling on the subway from one campus to the other, helping Iz Kugler, whose son is now our director of organizing for the AFT. And so I want to thank the UFT, Mr. Shanker, and the AFT for having the wisdom to get some of us to work full-time in New Orleans. Following my trip to New York City, in fact, they were engaged in an effort to put together the merger in New York State. And I asked if I could sit in on one of those sessions at the Cooney level, and I did. I took out a napkin and I jotted down some things. And when I returned to New Orleans, we approached the association and we agreed that it was time to bring teachers together. So that in 1972, we merged the NEA and AFT in New Orleans to the United Teachers of New Orleans. And from there, we bargained our first contracts in the South. And those contracts provided all the kind of things that we now have enjoyed. So thank you very, very much.
AFT was founded, as many of you know, on April 15th in 1916. And April 15th is actually an important day for my family as well. It was on that day in 1964 that my father, who had been serving as the secretary of the United Federation of Teachers, was nominated for the first time to run for president. That moment, as my dad was rooting himself deeper into the labor movement, my mom was in the back of the room and found herself also going into labor because she was pregnant with me, and I was born by that day's end. I'm so honored to be here today to celebrate the AFT's 100th anniversary, to talk about my father, and to speak more generally to this convention's theme, generation to generation. Many of the union brothers and sisters that my dad worked with came from labor families. I was so touched on the first day of the convention to hear Randy talk about her parents. And I have to give a shout out to a number of people, and I can't cover everyone, but George Altamari from the United Federation of Teachers, who is here today. His mom worked with my grandmother, Mamie Shanker, and George and my dad worked as brothers side by side from the very beginning. Phil Kugler, as Nat just mentioned, his dad co-founded the Professional Staff Congress at CUNY. Loretta's son, I know, is in the movement. Ed's daughter, Liz, works at the AFL-CIO. Jessica Humphrey is the daughter of Greg Humphrey, another dear friend and colleague of my father's. From generation to generation, we do as those of us before have done. We agitate, we organize, and we fight for ourselves and for working people. We recognize inequality, and we don't sit down. I can't talk about my father and honoring the past without talking about his mother, Mamie Shanker. As a new immigrant to this country, she worked in sweatshops, working long, exhausting days for wages that kept their family poor and wanting. My grandmother eventually joined the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union and the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. And like everyone in this room, through the union, she was able to enjoy better wages, benefits, safer working conditions, and she was able to have a voice in the workplace. When my dad started school, he only spoke Yiddish. His youth was not a pleasant one. He was 6 foot tall in elementary school, and he was not athletic. He faced regular bullying due to anti-Semitism. And at one point, a group of children in the neighborhood he was actually lynched by a number of kids in the neighborhood, and his sister Pearl, my Aunt Pearl, saved him. So as a child of immigrant parents, my dad recognized how education in this country acted as a great equalizer and offered everyone an equal chance to develop and succeed as an individual in society. He was in his mid-20s when he started teaching, earning about $50 a week. And to put that in perspective, his mother at the union shop that she was working in, sewing shop, was making 4 times that. Many teachers in the system were full-time substitutes at that time. They were paid less than regular teachers, and they received no benefits. So my father experienced many of the same things that I experience today as an adjunct faculty member. My parents met at a union meeting. My dad was organizing in New York by going to schools to explain a pension benefits package, a new pension package. And my mom attended one of these meetings and listened to him talk about the things that a union could do. And she raised her hand. She said, "Mr. Shanker, how many members are in this union?" And he responded, he said, 2,000. And she said, how do you do the things you're talking about with 2,000 members? And he said, "It's not the members that count, it's what you stand for." And this was central to my father's understanding of the union. Years later, he titled his column in the New York Times, "Where We Stand." And he didn't think that teachers should just be standing up for other teachers. He broadened the range of professions that the union represented. He would often say, "We should be called the American Federation of Creatures." He knew that all union members were professionals, and he hated snobbery, which he recognized as a root of unequal treatment. He understood that teachers were one part of a larger network of professionals who needed to work in solidarity with each other, operating as part of a structure that supported education in a healthy democratic society. Municipal workers, nurses, paraprofessionals, teachers, both K through 12 and higher ed, are not independent of each other in the big picture. You'd never know it from the comfort and authority that he projected in situations like this, but my dad was actually a pretty shy guy. If he didn't know you, he didn't know how to make small talk. But he would step up to this microphone with a napkin that had a few words on it. And he could express himself so beautifully, long, eloquent speeches that were pragmatic, yet passionate and highly persuasive. Unlike my father, my expression has taken a different form. I've always known that I'd be an artist and a teacher, but I never thought I'd be a union organizer. And though I know my dad would be proud of the work that I've been involved in, organizing in higher ed, he would hate what drove me to it. He'd hate the conditions that I and my colleagues face, and the fact that they have so many similarities to those that he faced as a beginning teacher and that his mother faced in the factory. Substandard compensation, long hours, unequitable, two-tiered salary structures, no benefits. As someone who loved teaching, I had to either stand up and fight or leave this profession. And I wanted to fight, but nobody can do this on their own. And I am so grateful that the AFT came to my city to form the United Academics of Philadelphia, and that my university has a great AFT union, the Temple Association of University Professionals, and that after a very tough fight in the past year for adjuncts, that union now represents all of the university's faculty. I remember being little, being in the audience here with my mom and my brothers, Adam and Michael, and I'd see my dad up here on stage, and I'd be back there and I'd wonder if he could see me too. And standing up here today confirms what I came to realize, that he couldn't see us individually, but he could, you could look out and he knew who was here. And I look out at you here today, and I feel his presence, and I feel his loss. And I think about the landmark anniversary that this union has achieved. I think about this room and the work that you are all doing, the people who came before you, and those who came before them, and those before them, going back 100 years. We're all here. And I want to end my talk by honoring each of you and your families and your ancestors who brought you to this place. We are a family. We are working generation to generation. There is a reason why we call each other brothers and sisters. This is tough, essential work, and I know that everyone here has made sacrifices in their lives to do it. I want to say that this is even truer when it comes to union leaders, as I know from watching my father's work. I've watched people see Randy Weingarten up here for their first time. Randy inspires people, and she has an incredible energy level. It's just through the roof, as you know. The stamina that it takes to do what she is doing. leading this union is remarkable. She makes it look easy, but you know the level of devotion that she has to this work also comes at a cost. So Randy, I want to thank you. And on this 100th anniversary, let's all recognize and thank our predecessors, our families, our brothers and sisters who are all here with us today as we celebrate this great union.
Great. It's an honor to be here to celebrate with you the 100th anniversary of this remarkable, indeed I would argue unique, institution in our American democracy. There are other unions that represent other sets of workers, and there are other organizations that represent teachers. But only the American Federation of Teachers stands directly at the intersection of the nation's two most important sources of equality in our democracy: public education and the trade union movement. As Loretta mentioned, my name is Richard Collenberg. I'm a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, which in most venues I'm very proud to say is 97 years old. We're pikers, though, compared to you guys. I wrote a biography of Jenny's wonderful father, Albert Shanker, the great leader of the American Federation of Teachers, who guided this organization from 1974 to 1997, roughly 1/4 of the AFT's lifetime. In my biography, which is called Tough Liberal, I note that Union President Tom Mooney called Al Shanker the George Washington of the teaching profession for his role in helping establish collective bargaining for teachers in New York City. In the late 1950s, there were some teachers who were wary of unions, saying collective bargaining was for blue-collar workers, not college-educated professionals. And Al Shanker asked, is being paid less than people who are washing cars for a living what you mean by being treated as a professional? And along the way, teachers understood this, embraced collective bargaining in droves, first in New York City and then across the nation. But if Al Shanker was the George Washington of the profession, he was also arguably the Abraham Lincoln of New York's teachers. He brought unity to the teaching profession throughout New York State, which, like many jurisdictions, had suffered a long civil war between AFT and NEA affiliates. For years, the AFT and NEA fought bitterly to represent teachers, and that old issue of class snobbery that had come up and that Shanker had fought in New York City reared its head again in these turf battles. In Buffalo, for example, the NEA argued that it could better represent teachers because it was not affiliated with the AFL-CIO, as was the AFT. One NEA placard read, "Do you want to be affiliated with plumbers, carpenters, and sheet metal workers?" Exactly. Al Shanker's answer and the AFT's answer, going back to John Dewey in 1916, was absolutely yes, a resounding yes. Shanker and others knew that if they really wanted to serve kids, teachers needed to be part of that coalition with labor unions to push for better wages, better health care, and better housing, because all of those things make it easier for children to learn in school. In 1971, there was an opportunity that arose to unite New York State teachers. When the state legislature proposed to increase the probationary period of teachers in order to gain tenure from 3 years to 5 years. And Al Shanker reached out to the NEA state president, Tom Hobart, to fight that proposal and to create NYSET, which became one of the strongest voices for teachers in the entire country. We may have a few people here from NYSET. A few years later, when forces tried to divide that union, once again, the vast majority of NYSET members said no. We have built a beautiful thing, they said, and we will not let it be destroyed. That commitment to having an energetic, unified teacher voice has continued under Sandy Feldman, under Ed McElroy, and now under Randy Weingarten's tremendous leadership. Because they all knew to coin a phrase that we are stronger together. Thank you and best wishes for the next 100 years.
Good morning, all. Actually, good afternoon, all. We are on AFT time. I'm so honored to be standing here today celebrating AFT's great history. And Toledo's Local 250 has been part of that history since 1933. So when you hear all of us talk about what AFT has accomplished over the past 100 years, that is because of educators, paraprofessionals, support staff, healthcare workers, and public employees just like you. AFT is truly a solution-driven union. We face problems squarely, we defy conventional wisdom, we're not afraid to think outside the box. Innovation is the hallmark of our leadership at the national, state, and local levels. We use our collective wisdom and our collective voice to improve our profession so we can better serve our communities. AFT has excelled because its leaders have not been afraid to confront mediocrity or be satisfied with the status quo. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk for a short time about the Toledo Plan, PAR, Peer Assistance and Review. And to talk about Toledo's intern intervention program, I've got to highlight a little bit the work of someone who I care so much about, and that's my husband, Dal Lawrence, who was president of the TFT for 30 years. Now, in the early 70s, Dal started asking teachers a simple question: how would you like to be part of a profession that is respected for high standards and excellence? And without fail, every hand would go up. So that started self-reflection. Why weren't we using our union and collective bargaining to give our members what they wanted and needed? Now, at that time, labor management relations in Toledo were not so good. School administrators had not been effective or fair in evaluating the work of teachers. And firing teachers was a declaration of war. And we won most of those battles. But Dal had led 2 illegal strikes against an administration that had little respect for classroom teachers. But throughout it all, he envisioned that evaluation in which both union and management had a vested interest was a way to end conflict, in a way to transform relationships between management and teachers around high standards that teachers themselves would own and enforce. Peer assistance and review, where high performance standards are established and uniformly enforced, replaced the haphazard evaluation system that existed. Accomplished teachers mentor and evaluate novices and tenured teachers with performance problems. They then make a recommendation regarding future employment to a union management review board on which there is a majority of teachers. We own the process. In over 35 years, the board has non-renewed or terminated the contracts of nearly 450 teachers in Toledo without confrontations that are so typical with traditional evaluation programs. So peer assistance and review open the door for more collaboration and innovation through collective bargaining, which we used to build a genuine profession for teachers and more effective schools for our students. In Toledo, teachers are partners with management, both at the district and the local level in decision making. They are the instructional leaders. They design and deliver professional development and lead curriculum and instructional initiatives. And the union school committee enforces the contract and is the school reform committee, a powerful tool for change. So questions about whether a teachers union should be involved in comprehensive school reform take a back seat to a question about how to make it happen. Someone has to reach out. Someone has to lead, and that is us, and that is solution-driven unionism. Toledo is just one example. Solution-driven unionism is woven throughout the very fabric of AFT's history. It's about using collective bargaining to define new roles and responsibilities for us in our professions, be it educators, support staff, healthcare workers, public employees. It's about transforming the system or the institution in which we work so that we have a real voice in our profession and so that we are respected and maybe a little bit feared. So brothers and sisters, you will find no better place for innovation and creativity than within and through our American Federation of Teachers. Thank you so much for your welcome, and I am so pleased to be able to share our small piece of AFT history.
Hi. AFT, congratulations, you're 100 years old. And I'm just 2 years younger. But I'm going to catch up. Okay. It took me, I told them it would take me 3 minutes just to clear my throat. And that's all I have, so. No. What did I learn in 83 years of labor and community organizing? Well, if there are any math teachers out there, my sister and fellow math teachers, you'll know that I must have been precocious to have started teaching when I was 15. And although I didn't get into teaching at a later age, I did say one summer in high school that I was 18, got a job in a radio factory, and after a couple of weeks brought 50 of the 100 underage women working there down to join the union. But since it took me over 300 pages in my book and get the title, Joy in the Struggle, it's been a wonderful opportunity. And the best part of it was when I finally became a teacher. How could I put it in almost just 3 words? Peace, unity, and struggle. Peace, end the violence, end the wars. Our children need peace at home and abroad. How can we say that all lives matter unless we make sure and take action that Black lives matter? My 3 minutes, please. I'm so proud of AFT for giving me the chance to march yesterday, and yes, I did see our leaders there. Let's applaud them for marching with us. Two, I said 3 things. Stay united and form broad coalitions. At 19, I took a year off from Hunter College. By the way, it was free of tuition. As an organizer for the CIO, and in 1 year alone, 1937, we organized 3 million workers. How did we do it? Labor united with the civil rights movement, the women's movements, and labor rights were protected by law. And that's what we need today. Black, brown, white unity, gender equality in its fullest meaning, and let's win back the right to organize. 3, don't be afraid to stand up for what's right. In 1933, still in high school, we fought for unemployment insurance and the safety net. We were red-baited, just like Franklin D. Roosevelt was called a communist. But we won anyway, because we did not give up the fight. And now they're trying to take away our safety net, raise the Social Security age again. Don't forget what Reagan did. For years, we improved Social Security. and then they started to take it away from us. But we're not going to let them do that. I feel so good about the young people today that are newly streaming into the political process. They are changing the debate and will help us rebuild labor and save public education. I don't have advice for the classroom. I admire so much the way our teachers are today are standing up to the inhuman practices, an average 70-hour work week. But I was something of an expert in multicultural education. And so let's enrich the curriculum, teach labor history, and include the Black and brown founders of civilizations. Thank you, AFT.
That's a hard act to follow. In 1975, Al Shanker sent me on a trip I'll never forget. It was my first time out of the USA. We visited Germany, Brussels, and France, and other unions, and members from the auto workers and the mine workers. We learned about labor, politics in Europe, and we learned how the European unions were fighting for their members. We went down 5 miles in the mine shaft and learned how the unions had worked with the companies to eliminate black lung, something we hadn't done in America. I met Alex Haig, the Allied commander for NATO, and learned about the Cold War, up close and personal. It was just a trip, just the first trip of many trips I would take to help me learn more about labor, brothers and sisters around the world. And I have Al to thank for that. I have Al to thank for me standing here today. He saw something in me that I didn't see. He groomed me and he sent me all over the world. And Al firmly believes that saying that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And he worked for a free trade union movement around the world. Al led the negotiations that led to forming Educational International, now the largest global union federation with more than 30 million members worldwide. Al's action at home made him famous around the world. His imprisonment in New York inspired trade unionists worldwide. Al's belief in the power of union to promote freedom and democracy led him to form the AFT International Affairs Department in 1981 to support international programs from unions developing training to democracy, promotion to AIDS prevention. Al believed in freedom, freedom of self-determination, freedom of association. He believed those freedoms belonged to every person in every corner of the world. And while some people talk about these things, Al worked to make them reality. And we are proud to carry on his legacy and that work today. We have a strong international department, and I'm here to say thank you, Jeannie, for loaning us your dad for those 25 years of history that he put there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction earlier, Loretta. I want to tell two of my best friends in the hall, David Gray and Ted Kirsch, please let me finish. I'm going to be brief. Don't close the question. There's a great exhibit next door. I hope you've had the opportunity to see it. And a lot of the artifacts are from the 1916, when the AFT was founded 100 years ago. One of the key artifacts there is the application for membership by that group in the AFL. Now, there were a lot of teacher organizations in 1916, and most of us had them in our own jurisdictions. Elementary school teachers had an organization, secondary school teachers had an organization, absent teachers had an organization. There were loads of organizations representing teachers, but none of them had any connection to the labor movement. And so our founders really did that, and that's the difference between the AFT historically and today and any other organization. That connection to the labor movement. And it was bumpy at times. It wasn't all peaches and cream. A lot of people were concerned about people who were public employees being members of a trade union. There are a lot of people today who evidence that as well, don't they? But the move for collective bargaining that we talked about in the 50s and in the 60s happened mostly in places where there was a strong trade union movement. It was the trade unions who went into the legislatures and said these people deserve the right to be represented. And it was we, as part of those trade unions, that pushed for that kind of collective bargaining. I remember in the 60s, I worked my first campaign in Washington, D.C., and I think it was 1967. I was 4, I think, and maybe 5. But I worked in that campaign, and it was expensive. You know, there were people on going house to house, and we were buying the donuts and the coffee and all of those things. But none of that money, very little of that money, came from the AFT. The money came from an organization called the Industrial Union Department. Do some of you remember that? Some of the old-timers? From the United Auto Workers, from the steel workers, you heard Leo yesterday, from the machinists. Those kind of people put up the resources for us to engage in those kind of campaigns, and we were successful. You know, I often read these stories today about people lamenting the decline of the middle class. We see it all the time. You see it in headlines and in magazines and everything else. And yet, if you don't have to be a statistician to realize that if you look at the decline over the last 30, 40 years in membership in trade unions, it matches the decline in the buying power and the ability of the middle class to sustain themselves. Why don't regular politicians talk about that more often? Well, that decline in the trade union movement in the private sector mirrors an incredible growth in the trade union movement in the public sector. And now things have turned around a little bit. And in order to pay our dues, we have to do the kinds of things that Randy and others are doing to connect to the private sector unions. The tremendous work Randy did on infrastructure with the building trades, the tremendous work she's doing and others with the steel workers, the machinists, and others who are in that. We need to double our efforts to help those in the manufacturing side and the private sector to continue to organize and to be successful. Now, they asked me to talk a little bit about politics, and I will for a minute. I'm almost done, Ted and David. The political road was a little different for the AFT. I remember coming to early conventions where we'd have resolutions, not quite as eloquent as the resolutions that we have today, but resolutions asking us to do this and to do that, but never having the connection that in order to do this and to do that, you had to have a political operation. You know, it was nice. We'd go to the legislature and we'd say, hey, we'd like to have this. And they'd look at us and say, who the hell are you? What connection do you have to what we're doing? You can't always ask. Notice that Rhode Island accent? Ask. The accent is this way. I just want to explain this. If there is an R in the word, you do not pronounce it. And if there is not an R in the word, you insert one. And I never learned how to say ask or ask. I could never remember. That all changed really in the AFT with the election of Al Shanker in 1974, because Al realized what an incredible opportunity we had, an incredible obligation we have to engage ourselves in the political process. He appointed the first political director of the AFT, Rochelle Horowitz. In '75, he took me by the nape of the neck and made me the chair of the COPE Committee, Committee on Political Education. And we started building a political operation. There is no way that you can deal with all of the issues that Randy and Loretta have to deal with, and I can't say Sister Mary Catherine, can I? I can just say Mary Catherine has to deal with. They can't deal with all that without a significant political operation. And so you're doing it. Keep doing it. Do it stronger. I know you put more resources into it in this convention, and that's terrific. You know, I know how difficult it is, really. I'm going to stop right here. I know how difficult it is to do all these jobs. I did most of them. I was a teacher. I was a building rep. I used to, and then I became a local union officer. I remember Friday afternoons. 3:15 Friday afternoon was the perfect time for the person with 800 grievances to show up with his 801st grievance, right? You've seen them, right? 801st grievance on Friday afternoon at 3:15. You're trying to go someplace to meet somebody for what we would call a drink. So I know how tough these are. I was a union president, and then Al brought me onto the national scene. But you know, I want you to think about this while you're walking out to go to lunch. I want you to think about what kind of a world it would be if there weren't a whole bunch of people like you doing this very important work. And I want you to congratulate yourself for doing it.